Hello, and welcome to part two of our series in Sage Intacct's multi-book functionality. In this part, we're going to kind of get into the weeds a little more and go through an example of the purchase commitments multi-book setup. So from our overview initially, we talked through that functionality, that native functionality in Sage Intacct for multi-book tracking, which allows us to track not just our accrual or cash basis, but also things like purchase commitments or US GAAP entries or management or board, entries that, we want to be able to stack or layer in and out on top of our normal fiscal period 1 through 12 accrual or cash basis books. So in this example, we're going to actually walk through what the purchasing commitments spend book user defined book setup looks like and how that can be really impactful and being able to forecast our actual total spend at any point in the year, even with a non-financial purchase order that may be kind of established in the system. So let's take a look at that here, right? Let's look at that setup. So what we've done here is go ahead and define our user-defined book called purchase commitments, right? So we've just set this book up as committed spending, right? And what we'll do now is basically in our purchasing configuration, we'll set up a transaction definition to do additional posting on a purchase order. Again, remember that a purchase order, it has no financial impact, per se in any ERP system, right? It's just a PO. There's no receipt, there's no invoice at this stage. It's really the order itself that hasn't been fulfilled, okay? Now, in my instance here as management, I want to actually see what my commitments spend looks like because I've got approved purchase orders sitting out there. Now, yes, they haven't been received or invoiced, but I actually want to see what my net committed spend looks like. Okay. So how do I do that? Well, I've established my user-defined purchasing commitments book, right? Now I've gone ahead and just set up some additional posting in my transaction definition. Right now, I'm not going to go too far into the details here around that, but what that looks like is going into our custom purchasing definition, transaction definition, and establishing that we want an additional GL posting set up there. So once we do that, we tell the system that we're going to have a little additional GL posting there. We're going to go ahead and configure where that posts. And that's done in our initial setup. And this is all one-time thing, right? It's once it's set, it's done. And then it just works behind the scenes. It's it's seamless to the users that are actually entering the purchase orders. So in here, I've just gone ahead and configured one of my transaction definitions called purchase order with spend management. I've configured that to actually post my additional postings to my commitments journal that we established that I just showed you on the GL setup. So what that tells the system to do is every time I have a purchase order entered, I want an additional posting impact to the GL. And what I want that to do is not go to my standard accrual posting, which I could actually have it do. But in this case, I don't want that, right? I want that to go to my commitments book. Remember our book stacking conversation in part 1, right? Well, this is where I can say, show me my accrual postings, my actual invoiced, vendor, invoices. But on top of that, stack my commitments have not yet been received or invoiced, but I want to see what that net spend looks like. This is that setup again, one time, and then becomes seamless to the user. So from a user perspective, let's look at this. Okay, so I'm going to go down to my entity level here, my entity 100. I'm going to actually post a purchase order. Now I want to show you this impact really quickly. Before I do this, before I actually walk through that entry, I'm going to go and run one of my financial reports where I've set it up to show side by side my normal accrual book with my purchase commitments. Okay, and that's this first one here. So I'm going to go ahead and just run this really quickly. And I'll just run it with a default date there. And here's just a standard expenditures budget versus actual with commitments. Okay. So you can see I've got a total budget column. I've got my actuals. This would be my accrual entries, right? If we were to drill into something like our repairs and maintenance entry, right? When I drill into this, there's my normal journal, right? This is my journal type here. This is GJ. This is going to my standard accrual book, right? So these are actual financially impacting transactions. And I have a commitments column, okay? So I want you to take a look at my software and licenses line item, okay? This is $1,450 in commitments to date, right? There's my actuals. Those are fully invoiced purchase orders, right, that have gone all the way through the system and actually posted, right, as an invoice. So those are fully committed and actually posted. Now, these are just my purchase commitments. So remember that 1450 number, okay? So we're going to circle back here into my entity, and I'm going to go ahead and enter a purchase order, right? So I'm going to go ahead and enter just a PO. Remember that I'm going to enter this purchase order with spend management. That's the one we defined that I want an additional posting to this user defined book, right? So I'm going to go ahead and enter a PO really quickly here. I'll just give it a 2019 date to fall in line. And I'll just pick a vendor here. Let's just say it's, I don't know, Global Printing. And as I go down, I'm going to ignore most of the entries here. Actually, so I'm going to swap that vendor here to Global Properties. I want a USD vendor here. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that vendor. Now I'm going to choose software and licenses as my item ID here, right? Again, this would be a purchase manager or maybe somebody in finance or your operations person. I'm giving you an example of software and licenses, but this could be anything. This could be subcontracting expenses. It could be labor. It could be items. It could be supply, it could be, again, raw inventory items. So, the item could be anything. In this case, I'm just choosing that software and licenses. I'll just establish quick department here and our quantity, how much. I'll just leave it at 1 here, and I'll just give it a price of, let's say, 9,000. Oops. There we go. And that's it. I'm just going to leave it at that. Of course, I could add more lines and more details if I needed to. I'm going to go ahead and just post that, right? So remember, this is just a PO, of course, right? No financial impact in your standard ERP system. The purchase order is just an order, no financial impact. Remember, too, just as a quick side note, I could do the same thing on the sales side. So if I actually wanted to produce a set of financials with my committed sales orders, I could do the exact same thing I'm showing you on the purchasing side. So again, I could even have a entire set of financials that shows my potential impact with open orders and NPOs, right? My net income with commitments, both on the sales and purchasing side. But I'm just walking through the purchase order here, in essence of time. So let me flip back to my report now. Right? Remember that 1450 line item here. I'm just going to go ahead and refresh that report. Okay. All I did is I'm just going to rerun that same report. Didn't change anything. Now look at our line item, software and licenses. And now we're at 10,450. So remember, all I did was post a purchase order, right? And you're behind the scenes. It's seamless to the user. It's seamless to the finance folks. Again, working on the GL side maybe. But when I run my financials, I now have a set of financials that show me my actual net remaining budget with committed but non-received or invoiced purchases, right? And that's really, really powerful. And this is just one example, of course. If I drill into this, to show you the details, right? There's that PO we just created, that $9,000. And notice the journal it's going to. It's going to my commitments journal. And there you go. There's the actual journal entry that was produced by my purchase order. Of course, I could keep drilling back into that original PO if I wanted to. So again, just kind of showing you an example of the power of this multi-book functionality in Intacct with our purchasing commitments as our example there. In part 3, we're going to look at statistical metric tracking and what that looks like, posting in the system and where we can kind of see the output there as well. Thank you. See you on part 3.